This is PTV Gold. I am SYED, and you're watching Fault Lines. Former President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, is facing serious financial and legal consequences of the opposition that he had for the sitting government. Not only Donald Trump is under trial for a few civil cases that can cause uh, considerable financial damage to him, but also he's facing some legal cases that can get him behind the bars. Many of his followers believe that he is being victimized for standing for the people of the United States. They also further say that since Joe Biden's administration has not been able to deliver on financial and diplomatic front, they're victimizing the super top candidate of opposition, Donald J. Trump, who may just fall into the slot of presidency. I mean, one of the candidates for the presidency in the election that will come next year. Is Donald Trump being victimized politically, or is it a brunt of the mistakes that he has committed in the past? Both sides of the argument are quite rational. We will evaluate this in the first segment of today's program. Team Fault Lines have prepared a package. Watch the package before I bring my first guest to the program.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump's indictment on charges of mishandling classified documents at his Florida estate has brought renewed attention to one of the most notable cases in U.S. Justice Department's history. Donald Trump was arrested and formally charged with federal crimes, a first for an American former president. Trump has been charged with 37 counts of hiding and mishandling classified documents. Indictment alleges Trump and his aide actively concealed the classified records, some of which contained sensitive national security information, and obstructed attempts to recover them. Trump has repeatedly said that he was entitled to the classified documents under the Presidential Records Act and declassified them before leaving office, something the Justice Department disputes. The U.S. Justice Department unsealed an indictment that outlined 37 criminal charges against Trump, including 31 under the Espionage Act. Former President and current Republican frontrunner in the 2024 U.S. presidential race has rejected the federal charges. Trump has repeatedly proclaimed his innocence and accuses Democratic President Joe Biden's administration of targeting him. Federal charges represent the biggest legal jeopardy so far for Trump, coming less than 3 months after he was charged in New York with 34 felony counts of falsifying business records.
Ladies and gentlemen, my first guest to the show is Tom O'Connor. He's a famous journalist from New York City, works for Newsweek magazine. Tom, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Tom, Donald J. Trump was recently arrested and was released afterwards. What exactly is happening? What is the case that he's facing these days?
So right now, former President Trump is facing an array of charges. Some of the largest case that's been put against him is the mishandling of classified documents, and some of those were found in his Mar-a-Lago residence in Florida. So this is something right now that's been dominating the U.S. political scene, because we've never been in a situation where a sitting president's Justice Department is seeking to indict and has indicted a former president who happens now to also be his top political rival. So it's quite a contested environment right now in U.S. politics, and we're seeing the Trump campaign and his supporters portraying this as sort of a witch hunt, that this is the natural result of the establishment trying to silence him and stop his campaign and his electoral run, especially while he remains the top candidate.
And that also reminds me that there is another case in which he is being investigated for alleged efforts to overturn 2020 election defeat. What exactly would this mean in context of American politics?
So the details of this allegation are that the Trump administration, and Trump himself, was at the center of this concerted campaign to deliberately and illicitly try to overturn the last election in which he lost to President Joe Biden. And this has to do with the many lawsuits filed across the country regarding alleged electoral fraud and voter fraud, which mainstream investigations have not turned out any substantive evidence of. Again, this is unprecedented in American political history. We've had questions about some electoral integrity. We've had close elections in the past, but never have we seen something on this scale before. So the U.S. Institutions, essentially, which are now, of course, run by President Biden, are looking to hold President Trump and some of his allies in that sense accountable for this campaign, which, of course, was, again, the time dominating the American political scene. It was a tough political transition, And in fact, probably for one of the first times ever, not a bloodless one, because we did see the Capitol attack. We saw people lose their lives over that. So this is something, again, that is raising tensions in the temperature across the political scene in America right now.
And thank you very much for bringing this up, as it reminds us the Capitol attacks, where former President Donald Trump is facing legal charges. Yet we haven't seen him facing any consequences for that. Does that mean he has a tremendous defense, a very strong defense against these cases, or is it the complexity of US's legal system that makes it difficult for Donald Trump to be tried for this case?
I think it's a little bit of both, honestly, because President Trump, of course, was openly encouraging his supporters to take a stand during the effort to confirm President Joe Biden's election. At the same time, though, he tried very carefully to remove himself from the center of that. Now we're seeing more and more information come out over the past 2 years, the past 3 years, about the exact role that Trump had in that. You know, the alleged war room planning involving former New York Mayor Giuliani as well. But the ability to actually prosecute him and place him at the center of as a mastermind role in this still seems to be kind of thin. And I guarantee you that the federal government does not want to put any cases against the former President Trump that would not stick. And so they're going to try to hit him with the ones that they're most confident they'll get a prosecution on, or at least an indictment. So that's something that we're seeing right now play out in the current cases he's facing. That doesn't immunize him from further potential legal fallouts from the Capitol attack, but it's not right now the focus of what's going on, though certainly it does color the context around the situation.
Now let's come to the international arena, where President Biden's policies aren't as promising as we would have expected, or his followers would have expected. Countries like Saudi Arabia are drifting away from the United States. Do you believe this is adding further to the opposition against the sitting government?
Well, it's an interesting question, because there does seem to certainly be a trend going on right now of other countries questioning their relationship with the United States, not in the sense that they would want to divest entirely from America, but in the sense that they want to diversify their relations. And you mentioned Saudi Arabia. There are a bunch of other countries out there who increasingly talk about the phrase strategic autonomy. Now, that seems to have somewhat begun under President Trump himself, when we saw some questions about the long-term relationship, the transatlantic alliance with NATO, with European countries. And now under Biden, that continues with questions about the situation in Afghanistan, where we saw the U.S. withdrawal. Now, President Biden has managed to put together quite an impressive coalition in the wake of Russia's war in Ukraine last year. But even there, of course, this conflict continues. I think at the time that was seen as very impressive for Biden. I think that won him some friendship, especially in Western Europe. But with the inability to see the end of this conflict, that's now looming over him coming into this next election, especially with the Afghanistan situation and some other issues in Saudi Arabia. We could put into that the difficulty to stabilize that relationship. There is some questions about President Biden's foreign policy. Then we could talk about Cuba, we could talk about Iran, certain areas where President Biden has somewhat maintained the Trump outlook to things, and there's not been significant progress in that sense. Now, President Biden still has some time to change that, but I think, yes, there are those questions there, but the question is, has Trump done any better?
Tom, to expand it further, Middle East at large is also witnessing a heavier footprint of Chinese in the region. Is it also a point of concern for the people in power corridors of the United States?
I think it certainly is one of the major concerns. When it comes to the Middle East, the problem is that the United States policy, especially in recent years, has drifted towards wanting to challenge China in East Asia, and also even more recently challenge Russia in Eastern Europe. And what that's sort of entailed is this mentality of, we don't want our partners to grow any closer to Moscow or Beijing. And these powers in the Middle East, some of them, such as Saudi Arabia and the GCC countries, are increasingly looking to stake their own claim in international affairs. They don't want to be given ultimatums by the United States, or any other country for that matter. And they don't see that same sort of mentality coming out of China and Russia, which still, of course, have very valuable things that they can offer these countries. So that's why those relationships continue to develop. With Iran specifically, we've seen the China broker deal with between Tehran and Riyadh. With Syria, we saw Russia's role in ushering Syria back into the Arab League. These are things that that were years in the making, but now they're coming all at once in a sense. And I think that this is a trend that's not going to be reversed anytime soon. The U.S. is trying to reassert itself in this region, but it's not come with the same sort of incentives or creative diplomacy and diplomatic efforts that perhaps some of these other countries have. So it's difficult.
And on the domestic front, we are seeing that the financial problems are also exacerbating for Biden's administration. Not only United States is facing one of the worst inflations in the recent history, but also has had the debt ceiling, which perhaps was one of other reasons that United States internationally has shown a weaker financial picture. Do you believe all of this is adding up in the problem for the current government?
I think that certainly, any sitting president, the leading thing that will either make or break him at times is the economy. Some of this stuff is outside of his or her hands when it comes to inheriting a situation from the previous administration. And some of it has to do with just the political deadlock in Congress right now. But by and large, I think the inflation is a number one concern for everyday Americans right now. I think that some of the lingering effects of the pandemic when it comes to unemployment is something that's hurting people. Now, certainly one thing that's going to be making headlines and already has made headlines is the promises that Biden had made about alleviating student debt. And that, of course, was part of the debt ceiling negotiations. It seems that that effort is going to flounder, and there's certainly going to be a lot of potential voters, college-age people who are looking forward to that, and now perhaps, and perhaps more likely than not, will not be able to enjoy the benefits of that. So all around, I think there are these economic concerns: rising prices, commodities, gas prices. This is all stuff that the Republicans can easily use to slam Biden, while because they're not currently in charge of the White House, not necessarily providing alternatives for that. And that's really the frustration right now, is that there seems to be a concerted effort from the Republicans to just disrupt Biden's policy just for the sake of doing so. And perhaps in many ways that's working. We'll have to see in the coming year and so before the next election.
Now let's knit all of this together, Tom. So the domestic and international problems that we have just highlighted in the previous arguments, do you believe all of this collectively is adding into the popularity of Donald Trump?
It's difficult to say, because when you're a year away from an election, I often say you could probably just throw away all your notes that you have right now, because we're going to be in a different situation next year. But we are seeing the signs of what obviously is Trump's staying power within the Republican Party. And that's despite the fact that there are many leading Republicans, both in office and strategists and various people who lead the RNC, who essentially are saying we need to get rid of Donald Trump, but they have so far been unable to do so. I mean, his lead upon his top rivals is so considerable that it's difficult to even find who the second person is in that. Now, that could be changing over time. There's plenty of time for that playing field to balance. But it does seem that the Republicans cannot get rid of Donald Trump right now. His brand of populism, his brand of galvanizing grassroots support is still a dominating force in conservative politics in America. So whether he'll be the candidate next year, I think that still, of course, remains to be seen. Let's see how this race plays out. Let's see where the legal troubles go. But certainly thus far, the legal troubles have not had a diminishing effect on his support among as being the potential frontrunner for the Republican Party. So we'll see. I don't believe that he'll be in jail before the next election, though.
So do you believe he's going to survive the legal battle that he's facing at the moment?
It does certainly seem as of now that is the case. I think that there's still plenty of twists and turns ahead in this legal saga and Trump's ability to navigate it. We'll see who sides with him, who sticks with him, who joins his side. But as of right now, it does not seem that the legal troubles will hurt his path to the candidacy. They could end up hurting his path to the presidency. But when it comes to his ability to dominate the Republican candidacy and the primary races, he's still ahead of the game.
And just to make sure if I understood you correctly, does he have all the support from his political party to be the presidential candidate, or is it quite premature to say this at the moment?
I think that the support in his party is splintered. I don't think he enjoys the full support, but that has not stopped him from galvanizing what really matters at the end of the day, which is the people's support, the polls. I think there are very influential Republicans who do not want to see Trump be the candidate. We've seen publicly many people break rank with him, but at the end of the day, they have proven unable to stop his popularity among the people, and that, at the end of the day, is what wins elections.
Thank you very much, Tom O'Connor, for being a guest in our program.
My pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break and we'll join you back with second segment of the program. Stay with us. Welcome back. Ladies and gentlemen, we all understand that Europe is one of the favorite destinations for people to immigrate legally or illegally for two reasons. A, because of European economies are thriving far better, performing far better than many other economies, and B, that Europe has a better legal and social security system that many believe can accommodate the foreigners better. Now, ever since the Ukrainian war has started and people from Ukraine have started pouring into the capitals of Europe, Europe has made the entry of refugees from other part of the world far more difficult. And this is pressing the economic and the climate immigrants to opt for more dangerous and riskier ways to enter the continent. In the spirit of effort, people are taking the dangerous routes coming from the Mediterranean, trying to use Greece or Turkey as an entry point into Europe, and this has increased the number of accidents that we have witnessed. A recent incident has taken place near Greece in the Mediterranean Sea, where 750 people were aboard on a ship or on a larger boat that has sunk. 79 people have been confirmed as dead. There are 104 survivors, according to Greek authorities, but these are extremely contested claims. Not only the people who were dying in the open water could not be rescued in time, but also the fact that the Greek authorities' role with regards to such immigrants have also been heavily criticized even inside Greece. What exactly has happened there? In order to talk about this, I have invited a guest from the state of Arizona. His name is Tom Lord. He is co-founder of Militant Wire Network and has a specialty over the matters related to Greece. Tom Lord, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
Tom, what exactly has happened in Greece, and what are the details of this tragic incident that have been reported?
So far, what we know is that a vessel that left originally from Egypt made port in Libya and then headed towards Italy, but veered towards Greece, sank just off the Peloponnese Peninsula, and the vessel was carrying around 750 people. The current death toll is at 78 folks, and we believe that several hundred others are missing. 104 people have been rescued by the Greek Coast Guard and taken to Kalamata.
If I understand correctly, the Greek authorities were unaware of this ship coming toward Greece, and perhaps this was one of the reasons they could not rescue the people in time. You agree with me on that?
They were. And also, if I can backtrack really quickly, you were asking about nationalities. I believe that most of the people on the vessel were of Egyptian and Pakistani descent, so a mixture of Middle Eastern, South Asian, and North African descent. The Greek Coast Guard is presently saying that they tracked the vessel about 75 miles off the coast of Pylos in Kalamata, and they said that had they made an intervention, that they would have themselves caused the vessel to capsize, but those claims are rather dubious, and people are questioning those.
But this certainly is not the first time when such an incident has taken place, Tom.
Greece is naturally a gateway into Europe. Not only the interesting thing about the vessel that just recently capsized is that it came from North Africa. Typically, vessels entering Greece with large numbers of migrants who have been trafficked are coming from the Anatolian coast of Turkey, and they try to hit one of the Greek islands. This particular vessel was headed towards Italy, and it was overladen. And the Greek Coast Guard says that they were tracking it the entire time, and that its captains or whomever, now the people on board said that the captain fled the vessel on a smaller boat, but the Greek Coast Guard is claiming that the people on board.
I agree with you, Tom, but is geography the only reason why Greece is one of the favorite destination of all human smuggler and all people who are involved in this illicit business of smuggling people into Europe?
So it's very easy to hit Greece from the Anatolian coast of Turkey. But these folks were actually heading up the central Mediterranean, and they wanted to go to Italy.
Tom, Greece and Turkey have both are facing the similar problem over and over, but yet they have not been able to come up with a joint mechanism to overcome this menace. Do you blame the geopolitics for this larger problem? Because both of these countries keep engage each other in a variety of conflicts over many affairs.
100%. And to make it very quick and brief, Turkey not only leverages the refugee crisis against the European Union in Brussels for Turkey's own status there, but also against their geopolitical rival in neighboring Greece. And it's important to note that Turkey currently hosts the largest number of refugees in the world.
Tom, many believe that Greece used this immigration issue as a bargaining chip while it negotiates with European Union on a variety of issues. Would you agree with me on that?
It's true. Yes. All right. So Greece absolutely leverages its position on the geographical periphery of the European Union to gain various leverage from Brussels. Then also there are various nationalistic forces in Greece which have positioned itself against in-migration into Europe.
Thank you very much, Tom, for being a guest in our show.
I appreciate you very much, Mr. Shabahat.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was Tom Lord. He was telling us that this entire problem is not only related with Greece. It also has got something to do with Greece's positioning in the international geopolitics, where it has rivalry, where it has border disputes, where it has many active fronts with Turkey, and this is making it more difficult for both the countries to come up with a collective strategy to overcome this menace. Also, Greece utilizes such issues to its benefit because it is one of the most vulnerable economies in Europe. And if Greece becomes lenient in settlement of these issues, and if it allows people to use it as a trespassing gateway into the heartland Europe, it will certainly increase the problems of European capitals, particularly, as I said earlier, amid all of the immigrations that are taking place from Ukraine to various European cities. Ladies and gentlemen, in the last segment of the program, we are going to talk about the recent visit of Antony Blinken, Secretary of State of the United States, to Saudi Arabia. The context of this visit is quite contested. For some, it was just a visit as usual, a business as usual visit, but many believe that the United States is witnessing that Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is eventually drifting away from the soft power, from the clutches, from the influence of the United States. Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, one of the best allies of the United States, have not only shaken hands with its arch rival Iran, which is another arch rival for the United States, but has also started business with China outside USTs. And this is a great point of concern for the United States because Saudi Arabia is one of the top sellers of crude oil in the world, whereas China is one of the largest buyers. I think it's second or first largest buyer of crude oil in the world. All of this complicates the geostrategic issues for United States that has been trying its level best to remain in control of the oil trade taking place in the Arabian Peninsula and the OPEC countries at large. Biden's visit was center of attention for many in the international media, yet we did not see any sweeping statements, any major promises coming out of this visit. And his next stopover further spoiled the situation for the critics because his next stopover was in Israel. How this visit went, what business was exactly discussed, and what was the background of all of this. We have invited Ahmed Zaki, one of leading experts of Middle East. He is currently in Somaliland and joining me on Skype. Ahmed Zaki, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Zaki, what do you believe is the background of this visit? Do you believe the relationship between Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and United States are on ever lowest of the recent history?
Mr. Shabahat, as you know, that we have already covered a lot of episodes about Saudi Arabia and their relationship with America. It was deteriorating since Trump came to the power last administration. Trump tried a lot to be very close to Saudi Arabia. He made a lot of business relations with him. But at the end of the Trump's period, they were facing a lot of criticism, Saudi Arabia, especially the most powerful leader in Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. He was facing a lot of criticism from American congressmen due to the case of Khashoggi and a lot of other related issues about human rights, their involvement of war in Yemen. But Trump was very close friend to them. When new administration came, he took all the way away from Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia were very, very angry about the American sanctions on Russia because Russia is a member of oil producing countries, OPEC. And Saudi Arabia were facing a lot of pressure because Americans, they were requesting to increase the production of oil because they put a lot of sanctions on Syria, on Russia because of the Ukraine war. And they were against the Ukraine war also. So there was a lot of misunderstanding between American administration and Riyadh administration.
Thank you very much, Zaki, for saying this. But my question was regarding the specifics, the specific nature of interest of Antony Blinken's visit to Saudi Arabia. What exactly do you believe he was there to accomplish?
Antony Blinken tried a lot hard because Saudi Arabia is in a position now that they have chosen the hard way to deal with the Americans. And that is the only thing that they can push to American influence in the world is that they should have to remove the petrodollar agreement. And petrodollar relations that they have with America was that every other country who want to purchase any oil from Saudi Arabia, they should have to use a US dollar for their transactions. And that was forced for a lot of countries to reserve their currency so that they can get an oil. And OPEC, mostly they were practicing the same way. And Saudi Arabia is the largest supplier of the oil across the world. That agreement was very good for American dollar and American economy and influence in the world. That's how they can put sanctions on the rest of the world. Now, they agreed that to deal with China and India and Brazil, or to deal with them, that they can sell out their products on their own currencies. So that is one of the alarming situation that the Americans are feeling. So with this under pressure, unless Saudi Arabia get what they want from America, it will be very difficult to repair the relationship. On the other hand, Americans, they are very close to the Israel, which Saudi Arabia is still not ready to welcome.
Zaki, I'm going to read you a statement that is published. This is a news item published in New York Times, and it reads: Chinese broker deal upends Mideast diplomacy and challenges US, as US is left to be a bystander. So, do you believe United States is left to be a bystander in the larger geopolitics of Middle East from this point of view?
This is since the last 50 years of the Middle East history. It's the first time that non-American politics have affected the region, and that is the Chinese diplomatic influence in the region, that they have resolved a very long difference between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which was fueled a lot of sectarian war and a lot of proxy wars between the two major powers in the region. After resolving this, Americans have seen themselves in a position that they have no longer influence in Iran, and they cannot more be influenced on Saudi Arabia. And they are losing the influence that they had on Saudi Arabia, because mostly the reason they were there was that we are protecting you from the Iranian attack or Iranian influence as the kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Zaki, importantly, Antony Blinken also visited the state of Israel. What exactly do you believe Israel's concerns would be with regards to the inroads that China is making in the Middle East? Do you believe Israel would be slightly frightened because of being a close US ally, and because of the fact that United States influence in the Middle East largely benefits Israel?
When you see the Middle East, Israel is the only strong ally of the Saudi Arabia, which they is the only ally of the United States. Israel is the only ally in the Middle East of the United States that they are counting on it. Means they can trust 100% on Israel government. They have the headquarters of the Middle East of their intelligence offices. They have military bases in Israel. They are protecting Israelis' interests in the Middle East. Israel, although it's isolated, they are forcing some other Arab countries to accept the Israeli normalization, like Emiratis and Bahrain have done the last year. This is how Americans are blindly trusting the Israeli political administration. On the other hand, now Palestine get invitation from China, and the Chinese president is willing to resolve the long crisis of the Middle East. And if he successfully complete that agreement between Israel and Palestine and become the guarantor of both sides and give clear guidelines between the two nations, it will be the huge success for Chinese diplomacy and influence in the Middle East, and that will be huge loss for American influence in the region.
Thank you for saying this, Zaki. But my question was, what would be Israel's major concerns with regards to China's stronger foothold in the Middle East?
Israel is concerned only one thing about Chinese, that they know that China is not going to follow the suit that Americans were following for the last 70 years. The question is that the Israelis, they want to get the larger portion of the negotiation, that if they get successfully the support of Chinese with their views, the Israeli influence will remain existing the same. But if they fail the same support that they had used to enjoy from American influence, and China will stand in the middle, that they are going to make an agreement between the two nations, and based on the agreement, they are going to fulfill that agreement from both sides, and they get the guarantor from China. That will be huge success for Palestinian. The question is that how much Israel is willing to sacrifice the land that they have already captured for a long time, and they built a lot of investment. They put a lot of investment in the occupied territory of Palestine. And if that Chinese diplomacy succeed in the Middle East, that would be the last footprint of American influence in the Middle East.
Ahmed Zaki, OPEC's oil supply issue was one of the major developments that brought problems that widened the problems between the United States and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We also remember the recent inclusion of Syria in Arab League, something that Saudi Arabia facilitated, and the United States was against this development. Do you believe there are other fault lines between the two countries?
And when you see on the OPEC side first, let us see the OPEC are now facing a huge pressure from the Western sanctions on Russia in one side, on the American sanctions on the Middle East, especially on Iran. These sanctions, they paralyzed the OPEC influence in the world, and OPEC now want to reduce their production of oil so that at least their influence will remain for a long time period. After the resolving between the Iran and Saudi Arabia difference, Syria got a lot of welcome from the Arab League on the Middle East countries, because there is no more conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So the proxy war, which I explained earlier in the interview, that have already diminished from the area. So now Syria get a lot of welcome again from Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Emirates, and even the Egypt, one of the most influential Arab countries. And the rest of the Arab countries, they were not having already a lot of influence in the region, and they were not having a conflict with Syria.
Ahmed Zaki, you said Saudi Arabia's stance with regards to Israel will remain unchanged. Why do you say so? Don't you believe that in the wider context of the geopolitics, Saudi Arabia will also try to revisit its policy with regards to Israel? Don't you believe this? Because I have seen many of the international commentators saying so.
They have already realized that after one day, even though when they have been asked that, what's your opinion about the peace agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, they supported the peace publicly, but you can understand that still they are not happy that Saudi Arabia, which was one of the closest ally of America, didn't notice them that they are in negotiation with Iran, with the collaboration of China. And that's where they feel that their trust with Saudi Arabia is deteriorating, and still it's going down. So their influence in the region, they have only two major powers in the region which have directly support to America. Number one is Israel. Number two is Saudi Arabia. Now Saudi Arabia, which was one of the most influential in the region in terms of economics and in terms of religious beliefs, now it's no longer that much close to Americans.
And Ahmed Zaki, would Saudi Arabia also be concerned with regards to the development in Sudan? Because Sudan being the nearest African country, Arab-speaking country, is one of the close allies of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in the region.
The case of Sudan is quite different from the other Arab countries. Sudan is not one of the countries which Arab Spring have also influenced it. They have a little bit historical difference and historical background. But yes, on one side, Saudi Arabia have a lot of influence in Sudan. But right now, Sudanese civil war conflict is going out of the control, because it's not in the hands of a military, which is a disciplined military now. And the military itself are now, it seems that they are losing the control of their own army personnel. On the other hand, the militants who were against the government, they are also losing the power that they were having influence of the rest of the country. And they are just focusing on the capital city of Khartoum to destabilize, so that the military will not get back to the power again. So you can see a lot of functional militant groups are newly uprising now, and the issue of the militant in African history are repeating itself in Sudan. This type of conflict, Saudi Arabia have never experienced it before, and they cannot control, because they have never had a relationship with any other African country which have a militant type of conflicts, and which cannot have a central power to control. So it will be very difficult to predict how much influence that Saudi Arabia will have the coming future in Sudan.
Thank you very much, Ahmed Zaki, for being guest in our show.
Thank you for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was Ahmed Zaki, and now I am inviting my last guest to the show. His name is Nazir Moeed. Nazir is an expert of Middle Eastern affairs, an Iraqi by origin, and an expert of the larger geopolitics of Middle East. Nazir, I welcome you to the show. Quickly, my first question is, what do you believe was the background of this recent visit of Anthony Blinken to Saudi Arabia? You just have heard what Ahmed Zaki have said. I would want to have your take on the same visit.
Well, Blinking's visit to Saudi Arabia comes to re-improve the relations with Saudi and with the GCC countries. The relations with the US was quite cold in the last year, so he's trying to melt the ice on these relations. As we know that Saudi now have other options like Russia, like China. They tied up their relations with Iran after decades of broken relations with their neighbor country, Iran. So America is trying not to be left behind in in the Middle East. So they are trying to cover up their defaults, to cover up the problems in the relations between US and Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries.
So are the Americans afraid of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Chinese coming together?
Yes, the relations of Saudis with China have developed very quickly in the last few years, especially in the economic aspect and in the exchange of trade. There was a Arab China business conference recently, and in day one there were $10 billion deals were agreed with Chinese companies and Chinese businessmen. This shows how quickly the relations with China in the Arab world, and especially in Saudi, the exchange of trade between Saudi Arabia and China in the last 5 years, it crossed $320 billion. So China, along with Russia, they are trying, to enhance and extend the relations with Saudi, with the Gulf countries, and with the Arab world. As this Middle East was a backyard of the US and Europe in the last century. So China and Russia, they know how to play the game. They know where their interest is, where the interest of the Middle East is. The Middle East is developing, and there is a lot of potential and lot of opportunities, and China and Russia, they are ready to cooperate. Now the Russians are exporting weapons to Saudi. The Americans lost some of their export because they were 24% of their export was going to Saudi Arabia. So the Americans and Russians, they are fighting for their interest. They are even though they are not fighting in a war, but again it's just like a Cold War between the Americans, the Russians, the Chinese, and the allies of each side.
Nazir, I asked this question from Ahmed Zaki as well, and I will also want your response to it. The inclusion of Syria in the Arab League was a point where many believe that Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is now drifting away from United States taking decisions that are not popular in Washington, D.C. Do you believe it was such a serious business?
Well, for the Americans, Syria is a totally out of control country in the Middle East. It's a country which was in the hands and in the control of their classical enemy, Russia. The Russian troops were leading the operations in Syria. They were, fighting against all the militias and organizations in like ISIS, like all the other the Syrian Free Army and all the other organizations which are fighting against the Syrian regime, which is an ally of Russia since decades. It was a country, Syria was a country out of the control of the Americans. So they didn't want that their relations become good and restored with the allies of the Americans, like the Gulf countries and other countries in the region, like Egypt and other countries. The Americans didn't want Syria to rejoin the Arab League and start building better relations with the neighboring countries. This will benefit Syria, of course, and especially in the last few years, there was all their relations were cut off. Economically they were disturbed because they couldn't, exchange any of their production to the other countries. They had, financial problems and financial crisis due to exchange of money. Their currency was disturbed, was devalued, and they had so much inflation in Syria. So the restoring the relations with the Arab League, of course, will benefit Syria, which is the ally of their enemy, Russia.
And lastly, do you believe the deal between KSA and China is proving to be or will prove to be economically beneficial over a period of time? Or do you believe it is too early to comment on the economic viability of this partnership?
Yes, the Americans have fears from the process of restoring the relations between Saudi and Iran. As you know, that process was initiated, was sponsored by China, which is not an ally of US, but it's from the totally the opposite direction of US policies and US strategies in the Middle East. The Chinese sponsored the restoration of the relations between the two major countries in the Middle East for the interest of the Eastern camp, the camp where China, Russia belongs. There are a lot of economic interests of China and of the countries in the region, but it's not in the interest of United States. As we have seen that there was so much increase in the economic exchange between China and the countries in the Middle East in the last few years, and there was very tight relations, economic relations with China, between China and Saudi, and also even with Russia. All what's happening is not in the interest of the United States. That's their fear.
Thank you very much, Nazir Moeed, for being guest in the show. Ladies and gentlemen, as my last guest has concluded, uh, the geopolitics of Middle East, which was originally revolving around the issues of security and democracy and restoration of democracy, are now revolving around the economic interests that are a byproduct of all the economic um storms that we have witnessed during last couple of years, be it Russia-Ukraine war, be it post-COVID economic issues, or be it the inflation that planet Earth is facing collectively these days, be it the debt crisis. All of this have compounded in the redefining of many international problems, including the Middle Eastern politics. Let's see how economics keep driving the geopolitics of Middle East. We'll join you next week with another program. And until then, Allah Hafiz.